Graham Moore, screenwriter of The Imitation Game. What was it that made you want to write about Alan Turing?
I was lucky enough to have been exposed to the Alan Turing story very young. Believe it or not, when I was a teenager, I was this tremendous computer nerd. I went to space camp. I went to computer programming camp. I sort of fell in with a bunch of you know, similarly awkward techie teenagers. And among awkward techie teenagers, I think Alan Turing was sort of this campfire legend, this subject of endless fascination. It almost felt like the sort of secret history of World War II, a secret history of computer science. Here was this guy who sort of secretly invented the computer, secretly won the war, but no one knew because he was gay, because he was persecuted by the government for it. And so over the years, I'd sort of always wanted to write about Alan Turing. I mean, it seemed like if anyone's life deserved a sort of proper cinematic treatment, it was Turing's. It had been told beautifully before on the page, beautifully on the stage, in a wonderful play by Hugh Whitemore, but it had never gotten a film treatment, and Turing's legacy certainly deserved that. But of course, then you go to Hollywood, and I moved to LA about 6 years ago, and you go around town and you start telling executives that you really want to make a film about a gay English mathematician in the
Yeah.
1940s. Oh, and at the end he kills himself. Those are not necessarily the buzzwords that Hollywood executives get excited about hearing. But I felt very fortunate enough to meet our producers, who were, equally passionate about telling the story, and we got to go do it.
Right. So then, talk about how you got that job, because you were at a party. Is that
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's sort of a crazy story when I try to think back on it. I had just moved to LA, and I didn't really know anyone, and I had met Nora Grossman, one of our producers, very, very briefly, and she invited me to a party at her house, and I think she thought I was a different Graham or something. Like, I have no idea how she invited me, how I got on the email list. But so I go, because what else am I going to do? And I see her in the kitchen, and sort of go up to her and say, "Hey, it's Graham. Remember me? No, the other one." Blah blah blah. And she's like, "Oh, hi," and we start chatting, and she asks, I'm like, "Oh, so what's going on? How are you?" And she says, "Oh, I want to be a producer, so I optioned my first book." And I said, "Cheers, congrats, that's so cool. Like, congrats on optioning your first book. What's it about?" And she said, "Oh, it's this biography of this mathematician. You've never heard of him, whatever." And I was like, "I know a little bit about math, what's his name?" And she said those fateful words, Alan Turing. And I instantly completely lost my shit and was like, "Oh my god, I'm obsessed with Alan Turing. I know everything. This is how the movie starts. This is how the movie ends. I've always wanted to write this." I sort of monologuing on and on and on. I will do anything to be a part of this. Like, this is such an amazing story. And she's like inching back away from me, step by step. Like, who is this psycho, and how did he get in my kitchen, and why is he accosting me? But so there began weeks of me stalking and harassing her and her producing partner, Ido Ostrowski, into letting me come on and write it on spec. And then from there, we were sort of off to the races. We spent a year just working on the spec, and we sort of had no one was getting paid, there were no due dates. We were just all in it because we all loved the story so much. We all thought it was so important to get to tell it on screen.
Right. Now let's talk about that writing process. How did you find? I guess you already had the idea in your head of how to tell it. How long did it take you to find the structure that you ultimately ended up with?
For whatever reason, the idea of what I've sort of pretentiously called our tripartite structure came very, very quickly. It's one of the first things I wrote down in my first notebook about the movie. I knew that I did not want this to be a sort of traditional birth to death biopic. I felt like that sort of structure, I'd seen it before and I wasn't interested in it. And the question was we always knew we wanted to make a movie from Alan's perspective. It was going to be his movie. We wanted him to be telling you the story. We wanted to see the world through Alan's eyes. The whole point of the movie was to open up Alan's experience to an audience. So it was like, okay, how would Alan Turing construct the Alan Turing movie?
Mhm.
And I became obsessed with this idea that Turing was fascinated by codes, by puzzles, by games. So okay, what if the whole movie was a puzzle, a game? What if we took these three periods of his life, the 1950s with his arrest and persecution, the 1940s with his wartime work breaking the code at Bletchley Park, and then the 1920s with his sort of first falling in love with Christopher Morcom and first being introduced to the concept of cryptography and the idea that his experience of love and cryptography were sort of essentially intertwined in his heart and mind. What if we take these three periods, chop them up, show them to the audience out of order, and so the audience has to kind of piece together what makes Turing tick in the way that Turing would be trying to solve. He'd be trying to piece together his own puzzle. So the whole movie is this puzzle that the audience is trying to solve. The answer to that puzzle is, how does Alan Turing work? What makes him tick? What makes his heart beat?
Right. Now, I'm guessing you had done a ton of research before you even started writing this, just on your own. What did you do after you got the job and started writing it? What kind of research did you do then?
I mean, as much as possible. I mean, I think one of the goals for me and for everyone on the team was to be voracious about sourcing. So never let one source stand as authoritative when you can get five more. And especially when it comes to the wartime period, it was all top secret. So sourcing is difficult, and there's a scene at the end of the film, if people have seen it, where there's a big bonfire and everyone throws all the records from Bletchley Park in the bonfire. And that's true, that happened. So a lot of that stuff was burned. So especially with the Bletchley period, we're making a lot of educated guesses and sort of educated interpolations from existing data points. So the goal was, we obviously had Andrew Hodge's wonderful 1983 biography of Turing as a basis, but that was obviously published 30 years ago, so we have more recent biographies that are great, as many different sort of sources of biographies as we could get. So it was, and then primary source stuff, so going back through letters, going back through Turing's letters, going back to the letters of other people who'd been at Bletchley. In the 1990s, there had been sort of a really wonderful movement in the UK to get people who'd been at Bletchley Park on camera talking about their experiences, giving their memories of Bletchley. Because they had been keeping the secret for 50 years, they hadn't talked about it before that. One of the most amazing things about this story is how well they all kept the secret. So, it was sort of a little bit like the Shoah Foundation, which has gone and gotten Holocaust survivors to talk about their experiences on camera, to sort of have records of this as people are getting older. So in the UK, we've got, there's some interviews with Joan Clark, who Keira Knightley plays in the film. We can see some interviews with Joan before she passed away. There's some interviews with Peter Hilton, who Matthew Beard plays in the film. John Cairncross, who Alan Leach plays in the film. We have a memoir that he wrote talking about his time at Bletchley, where he confesses to being a spy, and he sort of talks about MI6 and all of that. So it was kind of like, let's get... one of the most amazing stories is that there are references to Turing in the letters of Ian Fleming. Ian Fleming was working at MI6 at the time and interacted with Turing as part of that, and we actually know that Turing was in certain meetings that some people thought he might not have been in because Fleming was there and referenced him, and he hated Turing and kept writing all these nasty things about him, which I think is amazing. So it was a lot of as many disparate sources as possible, and then as we got closer to production, we met with members of Turing's family. One of his nieces was 18 years old when he passed away, so she had some very good memories of him. And I will say that I think for all of us on the team, one of the most amazing moments since finishing the film has been getting to do a sort of private screening in London for a number of surviving members of Turing's family, and his niece, who was 18 when he passed away. She said to Benedict afterwards that it was like seeing her uncle alive again, and it was just as she'd remembered him. And that, I think, to Benedict and to all of us, just nothing could have been more meaningful than to feel like, okay, all this research paid off, and we really did represent him the way he deserved to be.
Oh, that's something, yeah. So let's talk about once you had the script pretty much finished and the producers are now looking for somebody to direct this.
Hmm.
Morton Tilden, what did he bring to it that made everyone say this is the guy for the job? And then what was working with him like uh, once he came aboard?
Well, I think we all felt telling such an English story and such a very fundamentally English story that since we had an American writer, getting a Norwegian director just seemed like a logical move. I mean,
Right. Yeah.
what else would you do, right? No, I think it was funny. I think we all had it in our heads that we wanted someone British because it just seemed logical, right? Um, um, but then we met Morton Tildum, and we were in a lucky position that because the script had been Warner Brothers had tried to make the script for a little while, and trying to make the Imitation Game within the studio system was a disaster that I will never repeat. That we were making this movie for $15 million, which is such a tiny fraction of the budget of a movie that Warner Brothers is used to making. I mean, they had no idea what to. We were just too small. It was like way too tiny and delicate a film for the studio system. So once we had independent financing and we got to go off and do it alone, then we were in this position where we got to do anything we wanted. And Teddy Schwartzman, one of our producers, and who was in charge of the financing, was very great about saying, like, we don't have to. We have no foreign sales targets we need to hit. We have no like spreadsheets need to work out a certain way. Like, this is Alan Turing's film, and we get to go make the best possible version of this. We get to make the version of this that we want to make, and we are not going to let some sort of like number crunching concern get in the way. So what director would be perfect for this? What cast would be perfect for this? And we had all seen Morton's movie Headhunters before, and I loved it. It is not necessarily the most obvious comp for The Imitation Game. It's this pitch black sort of Coen Brothers-esque thriller comedy. But what you see in it, and what Morton's so great at, is this mastery of tone. I mean, Morton knows this like, sort of pitch perfect way of something that's dark but also kind of funny. And from our first meeting, I remember he came into the office, and he came into my office in LA. And I sort of wasn't sure what to make of him. And it's like the door swings open, and this tall, blonde man with this big bushy beard sort of strides in, and he's like, I can't do his Norwegian accent. He's like, "Where is Graham? It is Morton. Morton is here for Imitation Game." And it's like, it's like he's like backlit, and like the sun is shining, and you're like, oh my god, I love this man so much. And he sat down, and we spent 3 hours just talking through the script. And by the end of the first meeting, I called Teddy and said, you were right. It has to be this guy. Like, it can be no one else. He just gets it. I mean, he got the humor of it. I think one of the things that it was very important to me that the movie have humor in it and have a sort of liveliness to it. I think that Turing's legacy deserved that. I think that Turing's legacy would not have been served by a sort of dour and unwatchable film of his life. Mm-hmm. I don't know why he would have needed that. And I don't know how that would have helped put him back at the place historically that he deserves. And Morton, he was someone. There's some scenes in the film that are pretty light and hopefully pretty funny, and he really got that, and he got why some of the comedy needed to be there, and how you could sort of transition tonally between some of the lighter scenes and some of the heavier scenes. I mean, this is a film that obviously is going to end with suicide, and it's going to end with chemical castration. And Morton is a director who is just so masterful about these tonal things and can move between, in our film, a scene of kind of some light comedy about what are we going to order for lunch today, and then chemical castration not too many scenes later. And that's very much to his credit.
Right. So I'm just curious, what was the most difficult scene for you to write, or maybe the most difficult portion of the script to get through? You don't have to narrow it down to just one.
I mean, with a film like this, the whole thing was there is a responsibility with a story like this. I mean, we knew so much that this was. We had a responsibility to tell it fairly, tell it accurately, to tell it right. Turing deserved that. And I think we all felt that responsibility every day. I did, writing every scene. I think some of the hardest bits, I mean, obviously trying to depict the code breaking, and to do it accurately and responsibly, while at the same time, I didn't want to make a film that condescended to its audience. I didn't want to make a film where, and I think sometimes in films about scientists this happens, you get a scene where like the scientists sort of go off and like jibber jabber to each other in like technical jargon, and the audience isn't supposed to follow it. They're not expected to follow it. It's just like, it's science jargon, and now we can sort of move on with the story. We never wanted that. I think that doesn't serve anyone. It has the sort of like aesthetic veneer of intelligence, but actually doesn't communicate anything to an audience. And so what we wanted to do was to be like, okay, let's expect the audience to follow along through the code breaking process. Let us trust the audience's intelligence enough that we can make this incredibly complicated process comprehensible to them. And can we make a proper mystery thriller out of breaking the code? Because Alan Turing would have experienced it as such. To Alan, breaking Enigma was this real-life thriller that he was thrown in the middle of. I mean, you imagine this guy is 27 years old. He has never been outside of an academic environment in his life, and now he is working alongside Ian Fleming at MI6, and in charge of some very high-level espionage work. I mean, he's literally living inside a James Bond novel. So can we represent that? Can we get the big picture scientific process of breaking the code across, so the audience can sort of be invited into his mind? And so it was always like, with every moment, it was like, what's the big picture? What was Alan's big idea? Can we represent Alan's big idea accurately, and in a way that the audience can sort of be invited into? And that was obviously technically a tremendous challenge, and hopefully a worthwhile one. I mean, I think we've been really excited since finishing the film. Obviously we were working with mathematicians while we were making it, but even since, it's very funny. Like, we each get nervous about different screenings we've had, and I get really nervous at the ones with mathematicians. I'm like, oh my god, please no one find a mistake. Please no one find a mistake. Like, I'll be so humiliated. And I have been so proud that we've done screenings for mathematicians. We've done screenings for cryptographers. We did a screening at the NSA for NSA cryptographers, and they, so far, to a person, everyone's been like, nope, you got it right. That's how it worked. And that, for me, has been like, phew, okay, didn't fuck up the math. At least we got that.
Right. Now, you've been nominated for an Academy Award for this. Did you ever in your wildest dreams think that this would be your Oscar story?
No, I mean, I still can't believe we actually got to make our movie. Like, it was so, I mean, the idea that we got to make this movie our way, independently in London with sort of no corporate infrastructure behind us, was amazing. And I don't know that I ever really thought we'd get to do it. I mean, as I said, like, you go around town and you tell people that you want to write a story with this subject matter, and doors start closing pretty quickly. And I'm so grateful to our entire team who were so passionate about getting to do this. I mean, I think I still need to pinch myself sometimes and be like, wait, we really did it, right? Like, we really got to make our film and our way, and with no sort of meddling. I mean, there was no studio to come in and tell us, oh, you have to make him straight, or you have to do something else. Like, we never had that, and it was so we had this running joke when we were making it. We were all like, what's the nightmare note? I think a lot of writers and filmmakers do this. Like, if there's one note that you're like dreading, right? Like, the one thing that would just completely ruin the movie, like, what is it? And for us, it was always like, does he have to kill himself at the end? Like, does he have to be chemically castrated? And like, that's the thing you keep sort of hearing in your head, and it never happened. Like, we were so lucky to be with a team that was completely invested in making the version of the film that I mean, our producers deserve 100% of the credit for this, like in making this version of the film. And yeah, and now that people seem to be appreciating it, I mean, it's crazy. I think like we the idea that Alan Turing's name is being said on television now because of all of the award stuff is amazing, and Alan Turing's name gets to show up on magazine covers because of all this stuff, and that for us is really cool and really meaningful. And you know, Benedict's face was on the cover of Time magazine the other month, and it said Alan Turing, and Alan Turing's name hadn't. It should have been on the cover of Time magazine in 1945, but it wasn't. And that it gets to happen now is something we are also grateful to have been a part of.
Mm-hmm. Well, Graham, thank you so much, and congratulations on the film.
Thank you so much. Have a nice day.
You too. Thank you.